What if the Pope's final words weren't a blessing, but a warning? And what if the person he trusted with that secret wasn't a cardinal or a saint, but a young woman from New Hampshire who had no idea how deep the darkness went? The moment. Karoline Leavitt stepped into the Fox News studio. The envelope in her hands wasn't just paper, it was a lit fuse, and the world was about to watch it burn. The moment Karoline Leavitt stepped into the Fox News studio, the world shifted. Not with a tremor, not with a crash, but with the almost imperceptible quiet that comes before an explosion. The envelope. In her hands was unassuming, aged parchment, its corners worn, its wax seal cracked like an old wound, but to Karoline, it pulsed with weight. Not physical weight, but moral gravity. It wasn't just a letter, it was a confession, a plea, a warning. And if she opened it on live television, she knew there would be no turning back. She had rehearsed her lines, at least the ones the producers expected. Talking points on the upcoming election, remarks about the economy, even a witty jab or two meant to go viral in clipped video segments. But now, seated across from Sean Hannity, the script felt like ashes in her mouth. The lights above scorched her skin with artificial brilliance. The studio smelled like hairspray and coffee, but under it, something metallic lingered. Her fingertips brushed the wax seal. She didn't need to look at it to know the symbol burned into it. The twisted cross with two interlocking rings, the sigil of a group most believed was a myth. Sanctus Numen. Hannity's expression faltered when he noticed her silence. He followed, her eyes to the envelope, and offered a polite, puzzled smile. "Everything all right, Karoline?" She forced herself to meet his gaze. "I'm not here to talk about the White House." The words echoed through the room like a cracked bell. A camera operator glanced up. The makeup artist in the wings paused. Even Hannity, usually unflappable, raised an eyebrow. "Then what are you here to talk about?" Karoline placed the envelope on the table between them like a sacred object. The last pope didn't die of old age. He was silenced. And he chose me to finish what he started. The air seemed to thicken. A flicker of confusion passed over. Hannity's face quickly replaced by curiosity, and beneath that, something darker. The kind of interest that arises when danger becomes entertainment. "You're saying the Pope, Pope Francis, was murdered?" he asked slowly, carefully. She nodded once. "And this," she gestured to the envelope, "is the evidence, his final message, given to me. A woman with no ties to the Vatican, no allegiance to the Church's hierarchy, because he couldn't trust anyone else." The silence that followed was oppressive. Hannity's fingers drummed once on the table, then stopped. He was a veteran of political chaos, but this was different. This wasn't a leak. This wasn't opposition research. This was an act of war. "Why you?" he asked. Karoline's eyes were distant now, her mind drifting to that night in Rome. The air had smelled of stone and incense. Her heels had echoed across centuries-old marble floors. And when she stepped into that small, dim room in Casa Santa Marta, the man waiting wasn't the spiritual leader of 1.3 billion Catholics. He was a tired old man who no longer trusted his own church. "I gave a speech once," she said quietly. "In New Hampshire, about faith and courage, about standing when the world tells you to kneel." He heard it, and he remembered. She reached for the envelope, her fingers trembling just slightly. "He told me, when I read this, everything would change, that people would try to stop me, that they'd make me look crazy, or worse." A low beep sounded in her earpiece, the signal that the segment was being broadcast live to millions. Karoline took a breath and broke the seal. It had begun like something out of a dream. No, a nightmare disguised as divine calling. Karoline remembered everything, the way the Roman night pressed close like a velvet curtain, thick with secrets. The way the driver never spoke a word as the black car coasted silently through empty cobblestone alleys. And above all, the strange gravity that pulled her forward despite every instinct screaming that she had no business being there. Hours earlier, she'd been another anonymous face in the American delegation. An ambitious young woman from New Hampshire, seasoned in policy battles and television appearances, but no one special in the Vatican's centuries-old eyes. She had stood in St. Peter's Basilica like a respectful tourist, watching the grand procession of clergy, the shimmer of gold, the ancient chants that rose into the high dome like smoke. There had been no sign, no warning, until the knock at her hotel door. She had hesitated, half expecting it to be a mistake. A priest stood there, tall, expressionless, robes immaculate. He didn't speak, just extended a hand and pressed a thick envelope into her palm. She remembered the way the parchment scratched against her skin, the way the seal glistened blood-red under the hallway light. Midnight. Casa Santa Marta. Come alone. The message inside was scrawled in a hand that trembled, either with age or fear. Karoline had read it 3 times, the words seared into her mind, before she dressed and slipped out the back exit of the hotel. She hadn't told anyone, not her assistant, not the Secret Service detail assigned to the group. Something deep within her had whispered that this was no diplomatic summons. This was something else. The Vatican at night was unlike anything she'd experienced. During the day, it was bustling, almost theatrical in its display of ritual and splendor. But after dark, it was hollowed out. Empty of tourists, hushed of chants, stripped of color. Only the old stone walls remained, monuments to centuries of silence. A second priest greeted her at a side entrance, this one older, his face creased like ancient parchment. He didn't ask who she was. He simply nodded and turned, leading her through a narrow corridor lit by flickering lamps. The smell was different here, less incense, more age, dust, candle wax, the faint scent of something medicinal or decaying. She was taken to a modest room. No golden throne, no elaborate artwork. Just a wooden table, 2 chairs. And in one of them, slouched like a man who carried the weight of 1,000 sins, was Pope Francis. He wasn't wearing his usual white robes, just a simple black cassock. His face was pale, drawn, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion, but alert. Deeply alert, you came, he said softly, his voice like cracked glass. Good. Karoline stood frozen for a moment, not knowing whether to kneel, speak, or run. The most powerful religious figure in the world was sitting in front of her, alone, without guards or cardinals or ceremony. He looked less like a pope and more like a hunted man. I don't understand, she said at last. I watched your speech, he replied. In the middle of the night 3 years ago. I remembered your words. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is standing when the world demands you kneel. He leaned forward, and for a moment, Karoline saw the desperate fire in his eyes. You have no place in the church, no loyalties, no debts. That's why I chose you. From his coat pocket, he pulled another envelope. This one unsealed. The parchment was worn and yellowed, the handwriting uneven. He handed it to her, but his fingers lingered on hers. Not yet, he whispered. Not until I'm gone. They'll try to stop you. They'll lie. They'll tell you I was ill, that I died peacefully. But the truth is darker. The church is sick, Karoline. Not from the world, but from within. A cancer grows behind marble. Walls. She stared at him, trembling. Who? They call themselves Sanctus Numen, a name hidden in plain sight. They believe they're saving us. They're not. Before she could ask more, the door creaked behind her. A shadow moved across the hallway. The Pope's eyes darted to it, and his voice dropped to a hiss. Go. Now. If they see you here, you'll never leave Rome. Karoline hesitated. Every nerve in her body screamed to stay, to demand answers. But the Pope's face was etched with urgency, fear. She turned and fled. Behind her, the door clicked shut. She didn't know then that it would be the last time anyone outside the Vatican ever saw him alive. The Fox News studio was a theater of control, lights positioned just so, cameras poised like silent predators, every second calibrated for perfection. Karoline had been here before, many times. The sharp scent of hairspray and cold electronics, the hum of idle chatter before airtime, it was all familiar. But tonight, none of it felt real. Her heart thudded in her chest like it was trying to escape. Because tonight she wasn't here to defend a policy. She wasn't here to spin a soundbite. She was here to detonate a truth. The envelope rested on the desk between her and Sean Hannity like a loaded weapon. Its surface was scuffed from travel, the edges slightly torn where her trembling fingers had clutched it too tightly. The Pope's handwritten note still lay folded inside, the ink slightly smudged from the night she'd read it again and again, trying to convince herself it wasn't madness. The countdown began in her earpiece. "We're live in 5, 4, 3, and..." Then, on air. The studio lights ignited like artificial suns and the world tuned in. Sean Hannity opened with his usual warmth, crafted for comfort. "We're joined tonight by Karoline Leavitt, former White House communications advisor, and now one of the most talked-about voices in American media." Karoline smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. She couldn't fake charm tonight. She didn't wait for the usual niceties. No back and forth, no rehearsed commentary. She reached for the envelope and said, "I'm not here to talk about politics. I'm here because Pope Francis asked me to be." That single sentence struck like a thunderclap. The studio fell into eerie silence. Hannity blinked, stunned, his mouth slightly open. Off camera, producers scrambled, hands flying to control boards, unsure if this was a stunt or a breakdown. But Karoline kept going. "He trusted me with something," she said, holding the envelope higher. "And I believe he was murdered because of it." Gasps rippled from the live studio audience. Hannity stiffened, eyebrows raised, but said nothing. Karoline placed the envelope flat on the desk and peeled it open. Her hands shook, but she steadied them by force. She withdrew the note and unfolded it slowly, the crackle of ancient paper loud in the sudden hush. "He wrote this on the night we met," she said. "His handwriting, his last request." She read aloud, her voice clear, but heavy. "The church is sick, Karoline. Not from outside enemies, but from the rot within. They call themselves SN, Sanctus Numen. They believe they're saving us. They're killing us instead." Even Hannity, normally a master of control, looked rattled. "You're saying there's a rogue organization inside the Vatican?" "I'm saying," Karoline replied, "that the Pope feared them more than death, and he knew his time was running out." Just then, the studio's side screen flickered, unplanned. Grainy black and white footage appeared, cutting through the program's normal feed. A chapel, hooded figures, Latin whispers, one voice clearer than the rest. "The American woman knows. Silence her before she speaks." The audience gasped again, this time with audible fear. A woman in the front row clutched her chest. A man fumbled his phone to record. Hannity leaned in, eyes darting between the footage and Karoline. "Where did this come from?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Karoline didn't answer. She couldn't, because she didn't know. The footage had been sent to her anonymously 3 nights ago, via a flash drive taped under her windshield. No sender, no return address. "They're watching," she said, voice steady despite the storm rising around her. "They always have. Been. But now the world is watching back." Then the studio doors swung open with a bang, not security, not staff, but a man in a priest's collar, tall, his face solemn, too calm for the chaos in the room. He walked straight toward the desk. "Ignoring the shouts, the cameras, the crew. Miss Leavitt," he said, his tone measured. "You need to come with me. Now." Karoline stood slowly, her chair scraping against the floor like a scream. "Who sent you?" she demanded. The priest's lips curled into the faintest hint of a smile. "Sanctus Numen sends its regards, Vice." Moment Karoline stepped off the studio stage, chaos swallowed her whole. Security guards clashed with camera operators. Shouts erupted from every direction. The priest in the collar, his presence as cold as marble, moved with unflinching purpose, like a man who'd rehearsed this 1,000 times. Karoline didn't wait to see who would win that struggle. She bolted. Through a side hallway lined with posters of past Fox News anchors, she ran. Her heels clicked like gunshots on the polished floor, each one echoing the words that haunted her mind. Sanctus Numen sends its regards. A producer lunged to stop her. "Karoline, what the hell is going on?" But she pushed past, gripping the Pope's envelope like it was her last lifeline. Somewhere behind her, the priest was calling her name. Calm, gentle, predator smooth. She burst through the fire exit into the bitter chill of the New York night. The city swallowed her in a heartbeat. Honking cabs, blurred neon, people who didn't care who you were or what secrets you carried. She shoved the envelope into her coat and melted into the current of human traffic, heart pounding like it might burst, but she wasn't safe. Not yet, not even close. She ducked into a subway entrance, vaulting over the turnstile just as a deep voice behind her growled, "Miss Leavitt!" It wasn't the priest anymore. This one sounded American. Closer. Trained. She jumped onto a train just as the doors hissed shut, and through the glass, she saw 2 men in black suits arrive on the platform. Too late. But not by much. As the train pulled away, Karoline finally allowed herself to breathe. Just a little. She opened her phone. 27 missed calls, her inbox flooded with unknown senders, subject lines like, "You're not safe." "They're coming. Don't trust the police." And one that chilled her more than the rest. Check the envelope again. Her fingers trembled as she reached into her coat. She thought she'd memorized every crease, every ink smudge. But in the soft overhead glow of the train, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. One edge of the envelope was double-layered, a false bottom. She tore at it with her nail until it peeled open, and inside, a memory card, tiny, barely noticeable. Marked only with a hand-drawn symbol. A key, the subway screeched to a halt. She looked up, and her breath caught. A man stood on the platform directly across from her, facing the train, dressed in priest's black. No collar, no expression, just watching, not moving, not blinking. He lifted a phone and took a photo of her. Then he walked away. The doors closed. The train rumbled forward, and Karoline realized this wasn't just about a Vatican secret. This was about something much bigger, something global, something centuries in the making. Whatever Sanctus Numen was, they weren't just after her now. They were surrounding her, and the only way out was through the truth. The moment Karoline inserted the memory card into her encrypted tablet, the screen went black. Not dead, blank. As if the card had overwritten the system entirely. For a few agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Then, with a flicker, a white symbol pulsed onto the screen. A crude drawing of a serpent curled around a crucifix, fangs sunk deep into its wood. Sanctus, Numen's emblem. A low chime rang out, Gregorian chant, warped and slowed, like it had been dragged up from the depths of hell. Then the files appeared. She scrolled through quickly at first, then slowed, her eyes widening with every passing line. These weren't just Vatican memos or archived letters. These were blacklists, surveillance reports, coordinates, code words, names, American senators, British royalty, CEOs of global tech firms, each tagged with a single word in Latin beneath their photo ad sentior, I comply. then others, marked differently, photos crossed out in red. Beneath them, Negavit. He refused. She clicked one. It was a bishop from Argentina. The file contained grainy footage, him in a dark alley, arguing with two hooded men. Then a flash, then his body on the ground. The date matched a heart attack announced by the Vatican 2 months prior. The next file was worse, a hospital in Ghana. Nuns tending to children in a refugee ward. A secret shipment of medicine. But the report detailed how it had been tainted. On purpose, one child survived. Her name was highlighted, Mariama. Next to it, potential liability. Observe. Karoline gagged. This wasn't just corruption, this was systemic. Sanctus Numen wasn't a rogue cult hiding in the shadows. They were entrenched, institutionalized, running global operations under the guise of faith and charity, and Pope Francis. He had tried to root them out, quietly, carefully, until someone got to him first. One folder was password-locked, its title chilled. Her more than any of the others, the Leavitt Doctrine. She hesitated, typed her own last name. It opened. Inside was a document, dated 6 months before her meeting with the Pope. It was a proposal, a strategy to use her image, her patriotism, her religious speeches, her reputation as a rising conservative, to leak the truth from within. She wasn't chosen randomly. She had been studied, groomed. Francis believed the Church couldn't be saved from inside the Vatican anymore. It had to come from somewhere the public still trusted. She was the plan, and now she was the target. A message popped up in the corner of her screen. Device location compromised. 3 minutes until signal trace. Panic seized her lungs. She grabbed the tablet, bolted from the cafe, and vanished into the Manhattan night. Somewhere behind her, the hounds had been loosed, and they were closing in. The rain hit harder in the Bronx, bouncing off cracked sidewalks like the city itself was warning her to turn back. Karoline ducked beneath the awning of a shuttered pawn shop, heart hammering, every shadow a potential watcher. The tablet was tucked inside a foil-lined pouch to block tracking, but paranoia clung to her like the wet of her clothes. He was supposed to live here. Or rather, exist here. Cardinal Raphael Montaldo, once a rising star in the Vatican, whispered to be Francis's possible successor, until he vanished without explanation. Rumors said he'd been excommunicated. Others claimed he'd faked his death. She found him on the 3rd floor of a decaying apartment building, behind a reinforced steel door with 3 different locks. He answered on the 3rd knock, not with fear, but with resignation, like he'd been waiting years for her. "To come, La Donna Americana," he muttered, looking her up and down. "You took your time." His apartment was a tomb of knowledge. Books stacked to the ceiling, faded manuscripts, walls covered in scribbled Latin phrases and maps pinned with blood-red strings. Candles flickered in corners, casting everything in golden shadow. It smelled like incense, old paper, and exhaustion. "I need answers," she said without preamble. "You need a grave," Montaldo replied, motioning for her to sit. "But I will give you one last confession before they dig it." He poured wine, dark, untrusting red, and sat across from her. His hands were blistered, his knuckles tattooed with letters she didn't recognize. "Sanctus Numen was born not from heresy, but ambition," he said. "Long ago, before even Francis's time. They believed the Church had lost its teeth, that it had become too merciful. They wanted to resurrect the old Church, the Church of power, of punishment. They call themselves faithful," Karoline whispered. "They're not faithful. They're fanatics, a Judas circle, not 13 betrayers, hundreds, hidden across the world, politicians, judges, priests. Some don't even believe in God. They believe only in control." She showed him the tablet, the files, the footage. His eyes darkened. "I tried once," he said. to reveal it. I presented evidence to the College of Cardinals. That night, my assistant hung himself. The next day, I was accused of embezzlement. 3 days later, a boy claimed I touched him. Lies. All of it. But in the church, accusation is as deadly as proof. So I disappeared. Karoline clenched her fists. Why me? Why would Pope Francis put all this on me? Because you were untouched, Montaldo said quietly. Not by the church. Not by the system. You believed in something bigger than both. He needed a firebrand. And you were the matchstick. He leaned forward. You've seen the rot. But have you seen the root? The reason it festers? Karoline frowned. You mean Sanctus Numen? He shook his head slowly. I mean what? They're protecting. From a hidden panel in the floor, he pulled out an ancient box, bound in leather, sealed with a symbol she recognized from the tablet, the serpent, and the crucifix. He opened it. Inside was a book, small, brittle with age, handwritten in Latin, the E. Maledictum manuscript, he whispered. A prophecy, written by a dying pope during the Black Plague, hidden for centuries. Sanctus Numen believes it reveals the identity of the one who will bring about the church's collapse. They think it's you. Karoline went cold. The book says she will be a woman, Montaldo continued, with a voice louder than nations. Who walks with the dead and exposes the holy? A herald of ashes. That's insane. He smiled without warmth. Is it? The manuscript felt heavier than its size should allow, as though it carried the burden of centuries. Karoline's fingers hovered above its ancient pages, their edges browned and brittle like dried leaves. The ink had faded, but the script remained. Legible, Latin, hand-penned in a scrawl so frantic it looked etched in panic rather than purpose. Montaldo lit a fresh candle and leaned in. Most of this has never been translated, not officially, only fragments. And even those are whispered behind closed doors. Karoline turned the first page. The Latin words danced before her, strange yet familiar, something deep within her. Recognized the rhythm, like a melody half remembered in a dream. She read aloud, Et apparebit mulier ignis, vocem ferens tempestatis, et cadet corona super cineres eorum. Montaldo's face went pale. And there shall appear a woman of fire bearing the voice of the storm, and upon the ashes of their rule shall fall the crown. Karoline looked up. You're saying this is about me? He didn't answer. Instead, he flipped ahead to a later passage, one marked by smeared fingerprints and symbols drawn in red. This part is what Sanctus Numen fears most. It foretells a breaking, not just of the church, but of the barrier between sacred and profane. It says this woman will bring light to the hidden chamber, that her voice will echo where even God has turned his face. A chill moved down Karoline's spine. What chamber? Montaldo exhaled slowly. There is a room beneath the Vatican, older than the Sistine Chapel, older than the church itself. They call it the Umbra Vault. Never heard of it. Exactly, he said grimly. Only 3 living men know how to enter. One of them was Francis. She closed the book. So the Pope gave me this because I'm supposed to fulfill this? Some prophecy? No, Montaldo said. He gave it to you because you have a choice. That's what they don't understand. Sanctus Numen believes destiny is a weapon. But faith? True faith? It's always been about choice. The floor creaked, once, then again. Both of them froze. Montaldo blew out the candle. In the dark, he whispered, They're here. A window shattered. A thud from the hall. Karoline grabbed the manuscript and bolted as the front door exploded inward. Montaldo pushed her toward the fire escape. Run! Take it to the journalist, Miranda Chase. She's the only one left who'll publish without asking who she offends. What about you? Karoline cried. He gave a sad smile. This is my confessional now. She didn't look back. Down rusted. Ladders and into the night, She ran, manuscript tight in her arms, heart pounding like a war drum. She didn't stop until the Bronx skyline gave way to silence, and for the first time, the fear wasn't what lay ahead. It was what was already behind her. Rain lashed the windshield like a warning. Karoline gripped the wheel tighter as her rented sedan carved through the winding backroads of Maryland. Trees blurred past in streaks of black and green. Every turn, every dip in the road felt like a heartbeat skipped. She had memorized the address scribbled on the back of the Vatican envelope. Miranda Chase, 402 Glenvale Road. A name whispered to her by a dying archivist in Rome who had dared to say only one word before passing. Find Chase. Miranda. Chase was not a name known to the public. Not anymore. Once a rising star in investigative journalism, front pages, primetime interviews, awards by the dozen, until she had vanished a decade ago after alleging that a secret order had infiltrated every major religious institution. The story had been buried. Her sources had disappeared. And Miranda? She had gone underground, labeled a conspiracy theorist and lunatic. But if what Karoline held in her hands was even half true, Miranda Chase wasn't crazy. She was the last lifeline to the truth. Karoline's GPS beeped. She pulled up to an old farmhouse swallowed by fog and time. Paint peeled from its shutters like sunburnt skin. No lights, no movement. The silence was unnatural, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Karoline stepped out slowly, her boots sinking into wet earth, envelope tucked inside her coat like contraband. She knocked once, twice. Nothing. On the third, a hollow click echoed. Then the door cracked open, revealing the barrel of a shotgun, aimed squarely at her chest. Name, said a raspy voice from within. Karoline Leavitt. I was sent by someone who's no longer breathing. The gun didn't lower, but the door opened wider. Inside, the farmhouse was a chaos of newspapers, maps, and red string crisscrossing wall to wall. Old photos of cardinals, politicians, and even ex-presidents were pinned up like a web of hidden influence. In the center sat Miranda Chase, her eyes sharper than any camera lens, her fingers twitching from years of caffeine and paranoia. You've stirred up hell, Miranda muttered, studying Karoline. I felt it 3 days ago. Vatican chatter exploded on the dark net. Then I saw your face on the Fox News clip. You didn't just poke the bear, you lit its damn den on fire. Karoline laid the envelope on the table. Miranda didn't touch it immediately. She stared, her expression unreadable. Do you even know what you have? Karoline hesitated, only that it scared the Pope enough to risk everything. At that, Miranda chuckled, dark and low. He was the last. The last. One trying to stop it from spreading. You've heard the name, haven't you? Sanctus Numen. Karoline nodded. They started as zealots, became surgeons. They cut away every truth that threatened their doctrine. They run operations like intelligence agencies. They've silenced bishops, assassinated reformers, rewritten miracles. You think faith moves the church? Miranda leaned forward. Fear moves it. And you, darling, are now their greatest fear. She finally opened the envelope. Her eyes scanned the Pope's final message. She froze. Oh, God. What? Karoline asked. Miranda's voice was barely a whisper. This isn't just a warning. It's a trigger. What do you mean? Miranda grabbed a yellowed binder from the bookshelf and slammed it open. Inside, a diagram of catacombs beneath Vatican City. There's a vault below the necropolis, off limits even to most clergy. I've been chasing whispers of it for years. They call it Umbra Vault. That seal you're holding? It's the key. Key. To what? To the original records, the true papal succession, the banned scriptures, the Black Canon, books removed from the Bible not because they were false, but because they were too true. Documents that could dismantle the church from the inside. Thunder cracked overhead. Karoline's heart pounded. We have to go. We have to get inside that vault. Miranda's eyes narrowed. Do you have any idea what they'll do to stop us? Yes, Karoline said, gripping the letter tightly. And I don't care. For the first time, Miranda smiled. Good, then let's wake up the dead. The Vatican necropolis didn't exist on any public map. It lay beneath St. Peter's Basilica like a buried heartbeat. An ancient city of the dead, layered with centuries of silence, bones, and secrets. The air was colder here, damper, tasting, of stone and centuries. Karoline and Miranda moved in shadows, dressed as visiting scholars with falsified credentials. They had bribed a tour guide in Florence to slip them onto a private clerical registry, giving them an official window of just 45 minutes. After that, the censors would rearm. The guards would return, and if they were still inside, they would never leave. Miranda's voice was barely audible as they descended the final steps. Remember, this isn't just archaeology. It's architecture built to keep truth buried. Their flashlights cut thin blades through the darkness. They passed the tombs of popes long forgotten, their sarcophagi carved with faded Latin prayers and blank-eyed cherubs. The silence here was different, almost intelligent, like the dead were listening. Karoline's hand trembled slightly as she pulled the Pope's letter from her coat. At the bottom, in fine, trembling script, he had written one word, Umbra. It matched a crude etching on the far wall, hidden behind a rusted incense holder. Miranda pried it aside, revealing a small stone recess. She reached into her coat and pulled out a crucifix-shaped key, crafted from brass and bone, found in a dead monk's belongings in Argentina. She fitted into the recess. The mechanism groaned. Dust plumed outward like expelled breath. And then, with a slow grinding sound, the wall shifted, not open but backward, descending into the ground like a stone elevator. Behind it lay a narrow passage, just high enough to walk if they hunched. Faded frescoes lined the walls, angels without eyes, saints with mouths stitched shut. Karoline's breath came faster now. What is this place? She whispered. Miranda answered grimly. It's where the church buried the things even God wasn't supposed to see. At the end of the tunnel, a chamber opened, circular, with a domed ceiling covered in cracked mosaics. In the center stood a pedestal. Upon it, a black leather codex sealed with 7 wax stamps. Karoline stepped closer. The wax shimmered faintly in the flashlight beam. Each seal bore a different symbol, Greek, Aramaic, Latin. One she recognized instantly, the emblem of Sanctus Numen. Help me break it, she said. Miranda hesitated. Once we do this, we can't unknow it. Karoline met her eyes. Then let's know. Together, they cracked the seals. The sound was quiet, like tearing silk, but it echoed across the room like thunder. Karoline opened the codex. Its pages were brittle, the ink faded, but the words leapt from the parchment like fire. They weren't just church records. They were confessions, accounts from bishops admitting to falsifying scripture, letters between popes revealing orchestrated miracles. A full transcription of the Council of Antioch, a gathering said to have never occurred, where 13 men had voted to remove all references to female apostles from the canon. But the most damning passage came halfway through, a parchment bound in human skin, its ink a deep, rusty red. It was titled Pactum Lucis, the Pact of Light. Karoline read aloud, In darkness we shall guard the faithful. In shadow we shall build the illusion of light. What they believe must never be what is. The room seemed to tilt. Miranda fell, back into the wall, shaking. This is centuries of deception, she gasped. This would tear the church in half. Karoline's voice was hoarse. No, it would burn it. Suddenly the lights in the chamber flickered, then died. Karoline spun, flashlight trembling. Miranda clicked hers. Nothing. The air turned frigid. A low hum rose from the tunnel behind them. Footsteps. Dozens. No voices. Just the sound of robes brushing stone, synchronized breathing. "They found us," Miranda hissed. Karoline shoved the codex into her bag. "Run!" They sprinted through the tunnel, their only light the phosphorescent glow of the open vault. Behind them, figures appeared, hooded, faces obscured by bone-white masks etched with scripture. Silent, coordinated, and fast. As Karoline reached the main chamber, she tripped over a broken sarcophagus lid. Miranda pulled her up just in time as one of the masked figures lunged forward, brandishing a rosary made of linked knives. Then, gunfire. A figure in tactical black gear dropped from above, landing between them and the attackers. More shots echoed. 3 masked figures fell. The others retreated. The gunman turned. To Karoline's shock, it was the same priest who had taken her from the Fox News studio. But this time, he wasn't smiling. "We don't have time," he barked. "I told you Sanctus Newman wouldn't stop." "But there's someone who still can." Karoline stared at him, heart hammering. "Who?" He glanced over his shoulder as more figures approached. "Someone even they fear." "The original founder," Miranda gasped. "He's dead." The priest shook his head. "No, he's waiting. In Lisbon." The world was now watching Karoline Leavitt. What had started as a small whisper in the Vatican had exploded into an international storm. The letter had been passed on, the message spreading like wildfire. Karoline had become a symbol, a beacon to some, a threat to others. But in this last moment, standing in front of the altar in a hidden chapel deep within Lisbon, Karoline finally understood the truth. The darkness, the shadows that had been cast over the church were not simply from human betrayal, but from a much larger, darker design that had been set into motion hundreds of years ago. The Pope's final words had not just been a warning about corruption, it was a plea for a new world order, and Karoline had become the key to unlocking it. As they moved through the shadows of the chapel, each step seemed to echo louder than the last, the weight of her task pressing heavier on her shoulders. She could hear Miranda breathing heavily. Beside her, each breath sharp with the fear of what lay ahead. They didn't know if they were running toward salvation or destruction, but at this point, the only way was forward. The sound of their footsteps was drowned out by the roar of sirens. Outside and in that moment, Karoline knew there was no turning back. The very institution that had once been the symbol of hope, of faith, was now her enemy. The shadows were closing in, and the truth had never been so dangerous. In the distance, the faint hum of an engine grew louder. A car, a black van, approaching. Quickly. Karoline felt her heart race. This was it. They had come for her. She was the message bearer now, and there would be no peace until the truth had been told. But who could she trust? Who would listen to her? As the van screeched to a halt in front of the chapel, Karoline glanced at Miranda, whose face was pale and taut with fear. The priest, who had led them here, seemed to sense the end was near. He motioned for them to move quickly. "Don't stop," he whispered urgently. "Keep moving until you reach the city center. They'll be waiting for you." Karoline nodded, gripping the envelope with the Pope's final words tightly in her hand. The weight of the scroll was heavier than any burden she had ever carried, but it was nothing compared to the responsibility she now held. The fate of the church, the world, everything hung in the balance. The sound of footsteps echoed behind them. There was no time to waste. The chase had begun. As they fled through the dark streets, the noise of pursuit grew louder, the tension suffocating. But Karoline's determination did not waver. She would not let them silence the truth. They had underestimated her, thinking she was just another pawn in their game. Karoline wasn't a pawn. She was the one who would change everything. And she would do it alone, if she had to. In the distance, the lights of the city began to twinkle, a beacon of hope, or perhaps a reminder of just how far they had fallen. The world would soon know what had been hidden in the shadows for centuries. The truth, once buried deep within the heart of the Vatican, was finally free, and there was no going back. What would you do if you were the only one who knew the truth? Would you risk everything to expose it, even if it meant your life? Share your thoughts in the comments below.